Hey YouTube, Time Itself here. We talk about counters a lot, don't we? It's like rock, paper, scissors. One thing counters another just because that's what it does. That's why it's in the game. But in this video, I want to specifically address metagame counters. It's something Call of Duty, especially Treyarch, has done a lot of. Battlefield does a little bit, but I haven't noticed any in Titanfall, and that makes me really happy. There are a lot of definitions of metagame, but the one I want to work with here is most closely associated with card games. What cards are popular, what types of decks are popular, and then how do you build to counter those? And when you consider the RPG elements in an FPS game that let you set up your own soldier's loadout with your own gun, attachments, perks, and all that stuff, you can get into a situation where there is a definite metagame going on. The most obvious examples, and the ones I find most disagreeable, are things you can equip that are defensive, and that aren't always going to be useful because they require your opponent to actually do something. And if that something is something that's in the metagame that's currently popular, then having that counter, well, that might work out okay for you, but in general, if they decide to just stop doing that, your perk, whatever, that counter is no longer useful. So you're equipping something that you only think probably will be useful, but there's a reasonable chance that it will serve no purpose whatsoever. And balancing these things is actually really tricky. Now I say that, but in general these things are cop-outs by the developer to say, oh, if something gets too popular, well, there's this hard counter to it, so it won't work all the time. Well, it's actually not very fun to play games like that. Treyarch really likes this method of game design. Consider the Swarm, a high-level kill streak in Black Ops 2. They just spawned drones all over the map, and if you didn't have Blind Eye, they would swoop down and kill you. They just explode, and there was pretty much no other counter besides Blind Eye. Except the perk was generally not very useful, and so most people just kept one Blind Eye class around just in case the enemy's got a swarm, in which case you switch to that and stop worrying about things. Just stay away from your teammates because they might not have Blind Eye. But in general, it's just these hard counters that, well, if you don't have a Blind Eye class and the enemy gets a swarm, you're out of luck. You're just going to sit in a corner, otherwise you're just going to die over and over again. Or if you don't have a Blind Eye class, you could just leave the game. I talked about this some more in my counterplay video. I'll link that in the description. Same thing with Hardwired. If the enemy got EMP'd or the counter UAV, this would stop those. But if the enemy didn't use either of those, perk was worthless. Better off running something else that you knew would be useful, unless you just wanted to keep this one class around just in case that happened. But what about a couple things that don't fit into this metagame counters? Well, from Call of Duty 4, you've got both Juggernaut and UAV Jammer. While they're both defensive, in pretty much every single game, I mean, they're going to be useful. The enemy, because everybody's running UAV in COD 4, the UAV Jammer at some point will probably be useful, and you're always going to be getting killed or getting hit with bullets and explosives, and Juggernaut will be useful against those. Battlefield doesn't have nearly as many of these types of things, but the ones that come to my mind are the vehicle countermeasures. In Battlefield 4, there are 4 main countermeasures for things like tanks and IFVs. That's what I tend to deal with, so it's what I think of. First, the IR smoke. It stops laser designations, and it lasts not quite as long as the recharge is, and so you can really shut down somebody who's trying to use laser targeting systems to get your vehicle with the IR smoke. So things like javelins become absolutely useless, but RPGs and SMAs still work perfectly fine, and I think one of these stops the law. At least it stops it from targeting, but it can still have a direct impact, so it doesn't really help that much against the law either. The second smoke option is the smoke screen. I think this is the smaller, denser white cloud that goes right around the vehicle, and it does make it a little bit harder to very accurately aim a shot. But at the same time, if you've got an RPG or SMA, you just fire directly into the middle of the smoke because it's not that big a cloud. You hit the vehicle if it stays in the smoke, and if it drives out, well, then you can see it. Again, it's not a very large cloud. Now, the recharge is fairly fast, but it's hard to be effective in a vehicle when you're constantly surrounding yourself by a cloud of smoke, and you're kind of inviting people to come up and see for you at that point. It just limits your own visibility too much. There's something about reducing the damage multiplier because of the smoke screen. Wow, I don't know how that works. I don't know what's going on. But I do know that it does not stop the laser designations. at least if I remember how all this works, it's tricky and confusing, mostly because people don't use IR smoke or smoke screen very often. Partly because people don't use laser designations very often because they're not that useful. You see, it's quite a delicate balancing thing they're trying to work out here, and in the end, a lot of stuff just isn't useful. Anyway, the third countermeasure is the fire extinguisher. This ties into the whole critical hit system and the auto vehicle health degeneration at low health that they introduced in Battlefield 4. Anyway, there are only a limited number of situations where you can actually use the fire extinguisher, and a lot of them are, well, you're probably going to get screwed anyway. You have to take a critical hit, which is usually either a massive hit or brings you down to low health, but not destroyed, because if your vehicle's gone, you're not, obviously you can't use the fire extinguisher. The first three countermeasures all have their own scenario where they're going to be fairly useful, and if you get in one of those, it will help you quite a bit. But they're all easily outclassed by the fourth countermeasure that's new for Battlefield 4 that is going to be useful in more scenarios. Maybe not quite as much as one of the other ones due to the recharge, but it's going to be useful in more scenarios, and that's going to be more valuable than just being more effective, and that is active protection. With the IR smoke, if the javelin is already in the air, you can fire the IR smoke, but then you have to move out of the way because the javelin is already programmed to go where the vehicle was, and you'll thus leave the protection of the IR smoke. Isn't that great? But with active protection, you fire it when the missile's in the air, the javelin missile's in the air, or any missile for that matter from any of the rocket launchers, and it will stop it right before it hits the vehicle. No worries about timing or moving. You can just sit there and take it, and it activates instantaneously. This is the nerf I would suggest for active protection. Add in half a second of delay between pushing the activation and it actually turning on. DICE keeps increasing the recharge time on active protection, but as long as it's the countermeasure that's effective in the most number of situations, even if it isn't effective for the longest amount of time, it's still going to be the best countermeasure. In Titanfall, the Titans have effectively countermeasures too. They're called tactical abilities, but there's clearly a lot of variety out there in terms of what people run, be it the vortex shield, the particle wall, or the electric smoke. All of them seem to have their place, and they can all be useful in just about every single game without relying on what your opposition is doing. I've been fairly negative about this so far, but let's try and find some of the good points. For example, if I'm running around in Ghosts, throwing smoke everywhere with my shotgun class that I enjoy using so much, and one of my teammates says, hey, he sees his kill cam and he notices that he just got shot by a guy through smoke who was using a thermal sight, and my teammates, they don't want to all be running, incognito, that prevents you from showing up as bright white on the thermal sights, and so they say, hey, stop throwing smoke, it's actually hurting us. That can be kind of interesting, or you want to make a call out on a guy who's running UAV jammer or Ghost or whatever the equivalent is in the Call of Duty game. That's good too. But in Ghosts and Modern Warfare 3, if you're running the support strike package and you change classes, you'll lose all the points that you'd built up, and so having to change at that point is just kind of a pain that you want to avoid. It can encourage teamwork. In World at War, we would run all gas with gas mask or flares with shades, just throw them everywhere on a small map and hope that the opponents didn't have the appropriate classes with the right perks to counter that. And sometimes it would go okay, but it was never, well, a resounding success. We could not abuse it enough to make that happen. And what was more fun was actually to run around with flamethrowers, although I guess there was a counter for flamethrowers, just a perk that pretty much countered flamethrowers too in World at War, wasn't there? In Black Ops 1, I remember that we'd run into teams that would all run Ghost, and while our solution was at times just to break out as many explosives as we could until they started, at least a couple of them, started to wear Flak Jacket. This Flak Jacket, an extremely effective counter against explosives in the Black Ops series. While the metagame counters do add a certain level of strategy to the game, I think they take away more than they add, because you're always wondering, okay, which counter perks do I need on which classes for whatever is popular right now? And then it just turns into, well, I didn't have the right perks in order to do what I needed to. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the whole metagame counters issue. Not really something I'm fond of. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm trying to get back into this here. May was particularly busy, but hopefully we'll get some more videos out. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.